Welcome back everyone, Archetype Architect. If you're barely joining us for this video, I'll quickly do a rundown on how these are usually going to go. We'll discuss the ride line, then some support units that the deck received, followed by some recommendations, things you've probably seen in other deck profiles, and then we'll just end the video with some final thoughts. These videos are just a quick way for people to get introduced to new decks. In today's video, we're going to discuss the encounter deck in this set, DAIYUSHA. Although we also got Lukier in this set, she received support, but not a whole deck, so her cards will be discussed in the support survey video we'll be doing this Sunday. But for right now, let's get into the ride line for the super dimensional robo DAIYUSHA. Starting with the grade 0 DAIYUSHA, GOYUSHA, excuse me, I get them confused, who has nothing special to him but is needed as a starter for the deck, which you'll see the reason for that later, but he's just a simple go second draw card starter. Then we move on to the grade 1 DAILANDER, who when placed on Vanguard Circle lets you search your deck for base added to your hand. Again, we'll discuss the base when we get to it, so let's just move on to DAILANDER's second effect, which triggers when it's placed from Soul to Rearguard. If you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with DAIYUSHA in its name, you can give your Vanguard plus 5 count on turn. We will see if that's hard to do as we move on to the rest of the cards, but let's go on to the grade 2 DAIDRAGON, who when he is rode upon by DAIYUSHA, this is the grade 3 one, allows you to call it to Rearguard. Similar to DAILANDER, this unit also has an ability that requires it to be called out from Soul. It will gain plus 5k and an ability until the end of your opponent's turn, which states when your Vanguard is attacked, retire this unit, give your Vanguard plus 15k for that battle. A defensive mechanic's always cool, but it feels like Bushiroad is kind of just jamming them in every deck nowadays and not really thinking of a way to make them synergize well. I feel like they should just try to make blitz orders a bit more free or usable for some of these decks instead of just being like, oh, this unit can give your Vanguard plus 15k, because there is not a lot of like leaving your things on board. I mean, even things like Sacrifice Class, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, is all about just retiring your opponent's board and getting rid of their stuff. You have things like Gandiva, you have things like Shoujo Doji, you have things like Shiranui, you have so many decks that are just going to remove your stuff, so relying on things being on board for it to be your defensive one is not great. But nonetheless, let's talk about the super dimensional robo DAIYUSHA himself, who has two abilities. The first is once per turn, when he attacks you can counterblast 1 to draw a card. Then if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you choose any number of different named dimensional robo units and they get plus 5 until a turn. So you can get a draw for a CB, and once your opponent's at grade 3 you can get a lot of power to board, so that's pretty good. But let's look at a second ability, which is another once per turn that at the end of battle when attacked, you can put a card from hand into Soul, stand this unit, and it loses true drive. Then, if your bind zone does not have a GOYUSHA in its name, you may bind a GOYUSHA from Soul to give DAIYUSHA a drive back. This is a pseudo divine skill, as the deck has no way to remove the bound GOYUSHA after it's bound, or put another one back in there somehow. If you need to do both things, you would need to not only get rid of the bound GOYUSHA, but you'd also need to put another GOYUSHA in the Soul. It is crazy to me that they gave it a once per game effect and they didn't want to just call it that, but we'll talk about that towards the end. But now let's move on to support units. Similar to Mordalion, we'll start with the order for the deck, that being the base, Super Dimensional Fortress Die Base. That is a grade 0 set order with 2 effects. It being a grade 0 is great because you can just play it out on turn 1 and that's perfect. But the first effect allows you to rest the order if your Vanguard is a Dimensional Robo to energy charge 1. Then you can choose one grade 2 or less card with Dimensional Robo in its name from drop and put it into Soul. If you played the order that turn, you can search your deck instead of drop, so you can get any Dimensional Robo in Soul because, you know, you'll have them in your deck. The second effect lets you Energy Blast 2 to rest this card, or Energy Blast 2 and rest this card. If your Vanguard is a Dimensional Robo, to call a grade 2 or less Dimensional Robo from Soul to Rearguard. So this way we can trigger our other units' effects that require them being called to Rearguard from Soul by a card's ability. So that means that all those effects are pretty easily done because of this order. Overall, I think this card is incredible. It provides energy, it provides Soul, it can call units, you know, it's going to do a lot of what you want the deck to do. But let's move on to the actual units, starting with a grade 2 Die Lady, who when placed on Rearguard allows you to counterblast 1 to get a base from your deck and add it to your hand. So we should be able to at least play a base every turn if we're lucky. Her second effect grants her plus 10k when she attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, and you have at least 2 bases. So a great card to fetch the bases so that you can thin the deck and get as much as energy as you might need. Moving on, we have what most considered a key piece in this deck, and that is the grade 1 Die Battles, who while in Soul will let you put a card from hand into Soul to ride a DAIYUSHA from your right deck, excuse me, not from main deck, from your right deck. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 2 or greater, your Vanguard is DAIDRAGON, and your Soul contains GOYUSHA, DAILANDER, DAIMARINER, and obviously Die Battles, but he's not needed or he's not referenced in the effect, but he is the one who activates the effect, so you obviously need him to be in Soul. So now you get to go to grade 3 first every game, which allows you to aggro as quickly as possible. This means you can start multi-attacking with your Vanguard right away. Die Battles has a second effect like the others, which triggers when it's placed on rearguard from Soul if your Vanguard is DAIYUSHA, and your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, which will give your DAIYUSHA an extra crit. It will change it from crit base 1 to crit base 2, so a very good effect. So this makes DAIYUSHA a restanding 2 crit Vanguard. I mean, what more could you want? And then we have one more unit, and that is Die Mariner, who we had referenced in the Die Battles effect. Another grade 1 with 2 effects. The first triggers when he's discarded during your turn, and allows you to put him into Soul. So another way to get him into Soul for the superior ride, right? Maybe you're struggling to get some of the pieces. This way you don't have to worry about Die Mariner. He'll just get himself into Soul. The second effect is another Called from Soul effect, which grants Die Mariner plus 2k, and your opponent can't intercept for the rest of the turn. So another way to force your opponent's cards out of their hands, right? Like they can't use things on their board to guard, so they're going to have to use the cards in their hand. And with DAIYUSHA essentially always requiring your opponent PG, because it's a double crit Vanguard that's going to be swinging for a decent amount. But if you force the PGs out of your opponent's hand, that means that you're going to have to struggle to guard your rearguard dimensional robos after they gain the power boost from DAIYUSHA, which is a pretty good synergy of the deck. I really like it. But let's just move on to some recommendations. We're going to start with some obvious choices here, but we do need some countercharging in this deck, so you have quite a few options in Brank Gate, thankfully. The most common one being Bulbamine, but we do have a slight upgrade of Bulbamine that you can play in this deck, and that is B Hero B Dash. She gains plus 2k, but besides that does the exact same thing Bulbamine does. The only reason you can play that card in this deck is because the die base, or yes, the die base was that, yeah, die base is itself a base card, which is what B Heroes do, so they get to just use the B Hero support pretty easily. Honestly, it's a minor difference, but you never know when that 2k will be the difference between you losing a game and you winning a game. Then the last countercharger we have is Assembly Dragon, who uses Soul to search your deck for a set order with the same name as one in your order zone, and you get that card to your hand. Or if you have 3 orders with the same name in your order zone, you can countercharge one. This one's a bit more multi-purpose, with the Soul being really a non-issue in this deck. You can use him to search early and then countercharge later in the game. But let's move on from counterchargers and start to talk about some other units. We'll start with the Dark States Rank 8 Dual Nation card, which is Sarga and Darga. Again, the names, I'm never going to get right. But it lets you look at cards from the top of your deck equal to the number of set orders you control plus 1 and put a card into Soul. If you look at 2 or more cards, you shuffle the deck, so no stacking unfortunately. But then you can counterblast 1 to either call a grade 2 or greater unit card from Soul, or get a set order from Soul to hand. You know, I think it's a decent card. It's going to help you thin the deck, because you're going to be looking at hopefully 3 to 4 to 5 cards as you get through the game. So pretty good. You get to thin, you get to maybe a base gets stuck in your Soul, so you can get it out of there. Then we're going to move on to the last 2 cards we're going to discuss here that work together, and that is the grade 2 unit Bipolar Nebula and the grade 2 Blitz Order Freezing Wave. You might recognize the order from most Ava lists, but these 2 function as great filtering choices, and the Blitz Order becomes a huge shield very quickly with you resting your bases every turn. Bipolar Nebula can get you a Blitz or a set order if your drop already has a Blitz Order, so if you're playing Freezing Wave, then playing Bipolar Nebula is pretty good. Overall, the deck does have quite a bit of room, so these aren't the only things available for you. You can definitely try more things. But with that, we're going to end the recommendations and move on to the final thoughts. Overall, I think the deck is incredible. You know, my only gripe being that pseudo divine skill, but when you get to ride up at grade 2 and have a double critical Vanguard, it's hard to really complain about the once per game ability. You know, the deck has so much resource management that you shouldn't really struggle to use your effects with the base getting you Soul, units, energy. You know, you're going to be able to conserve the cards in your hand by just kind of recycling your units from drop into Soul and then from Soul to board. So the cost of the deck is a bit high if you want to play things like B-Dash and Surga and Bulbamine, but there is a way to play the deck a little bit budget by playing things like Assembled and Bipolar Nebula, and maybe play a bit more counts of the Dimensional Robos. I know that a lot of lists cut down on a lot of the Robos in the main deck outside of DAIYUSHA, Dialady, and I think that's kind of it. They don't really like playing a lot of them because, again, you just filter them back in and out, so you don't really need to play that high of counts. But the deck's got a lot of potential, and if we get more Dimensional Robos that can boost DAIYUSHA's power or give it some other form of guard restriction, this deck could become one of the bigger threats in the format, right? But we'll end the video there. This deck is one I'm excited to play test, and we'll hopefully have some gameplay videos next week once we wrap up the set 3 Archetype Architect videos, and then the support survey this Sunday. Again, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you here next time.